contra. Yes, I was going to say.
You mentioned that premiums are up for next year. Is that a function of increased perception of risk on your part, or is it some recoupment for the losses of something like hurricanes?
Yeah, I want to be clear about something. You said premium rates are up. Premiums themselves, which are a function of volume and whatever, may or may not be up. Okay. So it's really, the rate on business that's renewing is up. And no, it's not really a matter of saying, gee, losses were high, therefore let's recoup the loss. It's looking at the loss activity as some indication of what the future might be, because you're always putting out premiums for future losses and saying, okay, if I have that increased risk of loss, how do I factor that into what my premium structure should be going forward? I will also say that it's not always a matter of rates going up. The terms and conditions associated with the products can also be adjusted. So for example, what's the size of the deductible? Is the product working in a way that it was intended to work? And an example of what I mean by that is if you look at the homeowners market, like everybody here, probably has a homeowners policy, one would think. And if you go back, 20 or 30 years, the deductibles associated with a homeowners policy are pretty much the same as they are today, despite change in the value of money in that time, based on inflation. So what was originally a policy that was trying to provide coverage, trying to provide the ability to recover when something of a magnitude happened to somebody, a fire or whatever, has turned into a policy, an insurance policy, where if you lose your laptop or you lose your iPad, you're probably getting a recovery under it. And that's not necessarily the way the policy was intended to act. And therefore we've embarked on a plan to try to get the marketplace to realize that it's in their best interest, pricing-wise, not to have deductibles at say a $500 level. It's probably in your best interest to have a deductible at $1,500 and use the policy in a way that it was designed for.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? I saw a few extra hands. Oh, there we go. Wonderful, sir.
Sorry, this is a specific question actually for Mr. Zakelman, since you brought up the O word. As a large employer, how are you positioning yourself for the impending changes in healthcare? And what kind of a strategy are you considering with accountable care organizations and the providers?
Well, I'm not really the expert, but I have something written here, so. So under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, PPACA or Obamacare, we've been driven to carefully assess our options. Should we charge more cost to employees to offset the cost of the PPACA to employers? I don't know. What do you think? Do you think we can do that? Will the employees be happy? I don't think so. Should we continue to offer insurance, or should we incentivize employees to join the state-run exchanges? It's not clear that that's even an option for us given our size, but it might be. I don't know where this is all going to go with the state-run exchanges. I don't think anybody knows how that's going to work. And should we carefully assess the full-time employment within our workforce and seek to limit certain employees to 30 hours per week or less to limit our cost of health care? That's a serious consideration, especially for new hires. I mean, we do have a union environment where we're probably not going to be able to do anything like that in some of the plants, but in other plants, that might be an option for us. And it's we don't want that. We want to invest in our employees and not make decisions about how many hours they work based on something as silly as the cost of health insurance. But it's staggering, and so it's just a new layer of complexity. We've had to hire consultants and other third parties to design plans, to assess the design of our plans and the highly complex rules. And uncertainty is something that just adds something to our cost structure, so we have to protect for that. I'm sure that it's affecting every company in America today, one way or another. More interestingly is the low interest rate regime's effect on our pension plans. I know that's not what you asked, but I'll talk about it because it's probably of relevance to the same sort of considerations. If you're thinking about healthcare, you may be thinking about retirement benefits and other things like that. And whereas 5 years ago, we were basically almost funded, like a $19 million shortfall, $200 million in plan assets. Well, we still have $200 million in plan assets, but now the value of the obligations is $300 million, so we're like $100 million underfunded. Well, we're just sort of at the limit of what you can be, but it's costing us a small fortune because when you lower interest rates, the present value of the future obligations is higher, and in this low interest rate regime, the returns we're getting on our invested assets are relatively low as well. So it's been very, very frustrating. So the whole employment aspect of what we do, whether it's healthcare, whether it's retirement benefits, whether it's going to even think about renegotiating with people about what we can do for them in the future and not being as generous, going from defined benefit to defined contribution type plans. A lot of things to be worried about. So I unfortunately don't have a crystal ball to tell you where we're going, but I do know it's fraught with uncertainty and complexity, and that's only going to be a drag on the economy. That's the way I see it.
Curious, how many people do you employ?
Just about 2,300 right now. And,
do you expect, because of the flattening of American manufacturing that you're describing to us earlier, that you'll have to pare down that workforce, and because of these healthcare regulations coming online?
The reality is we had a massive layoff back in 2008. We had fewer companies under our umbrella at that time, and we went from about 2,500 or 2,600 employees down to 1,800 employees. And what we've been doing is investing in technology and buying certain other businesses that have opportunities in them, and we have shut down things that we've purchased that were not efficient. And of course, there were ensuing layoffs with that. It is incredibly difficult. We're right now considering some high-tech investments in one of the plants, and it will result, quite possibly, in certain people. The rate at which employment increases, let me put it that way, will be much slower because of that. It's tough. You don't want to lay anybody off. And we train people, we invest in people tremendously. But we have no choice but to do what's needed to survive and keep employment at reasonable levels in the communities that we're in to compete against, once again, I have my mantra, the foreign import threat. So that's where we're at.
And Arunas, we haven't heard from you in a bit here. What are your thoughts? Well, as a journalist, I hear all the time from companies and executives how frustrated they are with all of these regulations and all of the uncertainty emanating from Washington, whether it be about fiscal issues, maybe corporate tax reform. I know you in your remarks commented about subsidies and your goal to avoid them. What do you think about the current role of government in business right now?
Well, you know, for me, I mean, I see a lot of different business opportunities all the time. And the ones I tend to get involved with are the ones that don't require any kind of subsidy from the government, whether it's federal, state. You can't count on it. I mean, it's going to go away. It's unpredictable. It's like the weather. It's fraught with special interests, with, you know, all kinds of bickering at all sides. You just can't depend on it. So I just choose to run away from opportunities that have any kind of government involvement.
What are the red flags for you? Obviously, the Solyndra fiasco comes to mind, I think, when we talk about any issue in your industry. What are you specifically doing to avoid that blow up?
That's Miss Optimism right there, right? Hit me
Yeah.
with that startup Solyndra. I'm just kidding. I think, well, for our company, you know, the things that happened to Solyndra, we made sure that we don't have sort of the same issue. You know, every one of our customers is signing a long-term offtake contract to take 100% of our manufactured product, no matter what. We're only building the capital, making the capital investment for the amount of manufacturing required for that customer. So it's all 100% in use from day one. You know, we're looking at, when you're talking about sort of the problems you're talking about, foreign competition, for us, because, you know, we can benefit from competition, whether it's Brazil, Europe, China, on parts of our refinery, which is typically $20 million in a modular fashion. Foreign competition isn't necessarily an issue for us in that same way. Because we're modular, we can just grow with the customer, we can be more decentralized. So there's just a lot of things that Solyndra did that, you know, we're sort of insulating ourselves from that.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, any other questions? Carry on the conversation. Oh, it's hard to see. It's a tough angle for me.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. The first question would be for Alan. The one area of the markets that has not participated in this rally has been materials, iron ore, copper, steel, and they attribute that to a slowing of the Chinese economy. So you were speaking about how, I guess, a depressed steel market, wouldn't China be beneficial? I presume that you must export to China, and that has to be very helpful to you. I also have a question for Mr. Bennett. There is no question that insurance premiums have already skyrocketed. And it seems that, I know I just renewed a portfolio of New York metropolitan area properties, and the liability policy and the boiler and machinery stayed constant, and the property has gone up about 50%. The question I have, and I heard it from an attorney friend who represents insurance companies, that because of Sandy, New York, metropolitan New York, is not a favored place of insurance companies at this time.
Go ahead, Jay.
Want to do the insurance one first? Again, you learn from what's taken place. And looking at Lower Manhattan as an example, I'll just tell you, the thought process that a company like us goes through. You think about events that could happen, what kind of loss content those events would have, and you price for that. And then events happen, and you realize that you had imperfect information, and you refine what you think about risk going forward. So, when we looked at some of the losses, I said, we do postmortems on all this, and we didn't have many major surprises. But one of the things we did look at was in Lower Manhattan, based on the way flood maps and the way we had envisioned risk, we might have written a piece of business on one. I'm saying this for illustrative, but on one side of the street, say, okay, it's not in the flood zone, therefore here's a rate for that, and on the other side of the street, well, that is in the flood zone, so here's a different rate for that. On the other hand, all the mechanicals for both buildings were in the basement, which was flooded no matter what. So, you learn from what's taken place, and that goes into, the kind of pricing decisions you make on an individual account basis. One of the things I don't think we do, is look at an event, necessarily and say, okay, now that that's happened, forget it. We're just willy-nilly not going to be part of that particular area. But there are some times when you look at things like going back a number of years, like a Katrina, and say, boy, the coastal exposure we were taking on relative to our capital position, relative to a modeled estimate of what losses could look like, might be higher than what we're willing to expose our shareholders to. So whether it's a pricing decision, terms and conditions, or actually pulling a little bit away from writing the same number of risks, that's all in the mix as well. I hope that's responsive.
So with respect to discussion about the Chinese market for steel, I guess I just want to put a couple remarks as a preface, because I've been talking almost like a crying kid who's upset about something, and those nasty Chinese, they're really playing unfair, and I think they are, but but we have to recognize that China really is a dynamic powerhouse, both from a manufacturing perspective, and recognize that a significant percentage of our students here at the Simon School are Chinese, and they are coming here to get this great education, and we're glad to give it to them, and we hope they can stay. So let's talk about immigration reform. But when things go well and China is consuming a lot, I'm making a lot of money, because that's when the market for steel is a little tighter and the margins are higher. And odds are, if things are going well in China, things are probably going well here too. So I shouldn't complain that much. But your comment was, could China be a place for us to export our pipes to? And it's not happened. It's really, what goes on is that as their economy slumps off a bit, they, because they're kind of still really not a market-based economy, maintain output because the government sets things up so that steel companies can keep that output up. But what do they do with it? They have to do something with it. They ship it abroad. Now, most countries, especially the U.S., has countervailing duty measures against direct Chinese steel importation, so they ship it to third parties. They ship it to even Korea, which makes steel of its own, but it'll go to Korea, goes to other Asian Far East countries where Thailand, et cetera, where steel is being made into tubes and then brought in a circuitous way to avoid certain rules. I could get into that, but you're probably not interested, and then brought in here. So the slowdown in China has not been there's not been any sort of opportunity for us. Hopefully, though, in a upturn environment, China will be the driver of profitability in the world. So we'll see.